Hi, welcome to Project 4, the Museum CSS Layout. So in the last textbook demonstration, you learned how to attach a CSS style sheet. In this chapter, begin by creating a CSS style sheet and then adding some properties to it by adding ID selectors, tag selectors, adding properties to those selectors, and then creating a CSS style sheet in which you will use to link to and attach to your website. When you begin to create your CSS styles, make sure that you are careful with your coding. The coding has to be exact when you type it in. Don't use spaces when you're naming your tag and ID selectors. So let's go ahead and begin in the textbook on Chapter 4, Project 4, Museum CSS. So you should have watched the CSS layout overview video, and now we're going to jump right in to begin stage 1 in the Museum CSS layout project. And I'm in Dreamweaver, and I'm going to show you how I selected my root folder. Go to your Manage Sites and click on the local site folder to browse to your folder. This is the folder that I downloaded from Against the Clock. So let me my desktop so you can see what that looks like. So you downloaded your Dreamweaver files, and then I expanded the museum file by unzipping it, double clicking on it, and then I moved this folder to my WIP folder and called it Museum. So now when I'm in Dreamweaver and I go to Manage Sites, I can point to that folder or select that folder in my WIP folder, and I've called mine Museum Sample. So inside that folder are all the files and images and graphics that I need to complete this assignment. So I'm going to choose that folder, and now I have my Files panel open, and I can see all of the files that I will need. So first, we are going to create our HTML web page. So you can go to Create New and select HTML, and we're in HTML5, and go ahead and create your page, and then we're going to save it and call it design.html, and make sure you save it in your local root folder. So now that page has been added to your local root folder, and you can see it in your Files panel. Now I'm going to select the CSS Designer panel. If you don't see that, you can go to the Window menu and select it there. Make sure that the All button is selected. In the Sources area, click on the plus button to create a new CSS file. And we're going to call this museumstyles.css and add it as a link. If you click on the Browse button, you will choose to save it in your local root folder. So I'm just going to type it in again here. And remember, since you can't use spaces, you can use a hyphen instead. And I'm going to save that right into my local root folder and click OK. And now if I go to my Files panel, I will see that CSS style sheet saved at the same level as my design.html web page. So going back to CSS Designer, I can see that the Museum Style CSS sheet is attached. Then I can see that to the left in the split view, I can see the source code for my HTML page, and then next to it is the CSS style sheet. And I can click on that to see the code for that particular style sheet. So we don't have anything in any code there yet. So, but we're going to add to it on that style sheet will be applied, that code will be applied to every site page where we link that CSS style sheet to. Also note that if you want to save at this point, you have to go to File, Save All to save both pages, your design.html page and your museum style CSS style sheet. I'm going to switch to Design View now, and now I'm going to go to my source code. I'm on the HTML page, and I'm going to select the Insert panel. And again, if you don't see that, you can go to Window and select Insert. So make sure you've selected HTML, and then we're going to place a header onto our web page. So we can select the header option, and we click it, it will bring up our dialog pane here. Make sure that you want to insert at the insertion point, and we're going to create a new CSS rule. And we want to apply this as a tag, which redefines an HTML element. So the header is a basic HTML element or tag, and we can define properties that will be assigned to any time we use the header tag for this website. Choose header in the selector name. So these are all our HTML tags, and then we can choose the header tag, and then make sure that your rule is going to be defined in your CSS style sheet. If you only selected this document, it will only be defined in this document page. So if you select the CSS style sheet, it will be applied to that style sheet, and you can apply that to any page where you've linked that style sheet. Go ahead and click OK. And now we can add some properties. So select the background, and we can select a background color. And we can type in our web hex code that you can use a web safe color chart. And we know in this case we just want to assign the background color of white, and the code for that web color is the hashtag FFF symbol, and we need to use all caps for our web colors. Then click on box in the category list, and we can define a box width. So we're going to type in 930, and it's set to pixels, and hit tab. And you'll just get used to different pixel sizes, so just keep in mind basic screen width sizes are about 1,000 pixels. So we want our box to fit within that size. So just as a general guideline. So we're going to select 930 pixels for the width of our box, and then go to the padding area, and we're going to leave same for all checked on. So the padding is the inset space inside of our box. I'm going to type in 10 pixels for each side. Then go to the margin and deselect same for all, and we're going to type in 0 for the top, and then auto for the left and right, 0 for the bottom. And what the auto setting does is it allows the element to be centered within its parent container. So it'll be centered in that box container. Go ahead and click OK, and then click OK again. And now we can see in the page code we've added a header. It's just puts placeholder text in that header. We've got the padding that we've typed in, and the margin, it's within the body tags. And then if we click on the CSS style sheet, we can see we've got that header tag now with the color, the white color assigned to the background, with the padding and the width and the margins set up. I'm going to go back to the source code and click on the edge of my header element to select it. You can go ahead and save all if you want, since we've added some code now to the style sheet. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to switch to live view, and now I'm going to select the footer in the insert panel and click and drag the footer until I see a green line underneath that header. So once you see that green line right underneath the header, I can release the mouse, and now the footer is placed right under the header, and you can see in the code view that the footer is placed outside of the header tag, below the header tag, but still within the body tags. Go to CSS Designer, make sure all is selected, and we're going to add a selector. So in the selector area, click on the plus button to add a selector. It automatically appears on the body footer because we have a footer in the body tags. But we're going to remove the body text and just type in footer and hit return, and then we're going to add properties to our footer. If you go to the properties area, deselect show set so that you can add properties to the footer. go to the width, and we're going to type in a percentage. We're going to type in 100% and hit tab. And so what that does is, using the percentage, it defines the element's width as a percentage in its parent container. So in this case, the footer is going to occupy the entire width of that container that it's in. So it's going to span across that parent container. Then we want to set the margins. So if we scroll down, we can find the margins and select 10 pixels for the top and the bottom. You can type in 10, or you can use the bar to scroll until you reach the number 10, and then hit tab or return. Click on the T to bring up the text properties, and then look for the text align property, and we're going to center that. And now you can see the text is centered in the footer. So you may want to go ahead and go to File, Save All, just so you don't lose any of your work at this point. So we're still in live view, and now we're going to go back to the Insert panel and insert a div container. So what we want to do is we want to insert that div container right between the two elements. So when you see that green line in between the header and the footer, then you can release your mouse. Go back to CSS Designer and then add a selector. In live view, select the div element, and you can see that the div tag, it shows in the element display. If you click on the plus sign, so here we're going to add a customize selector. Select your own or create your own name for this ID selector. So we're going to use the name page content, and we're going to use a dash, no space here, and then hit return. And make sure you select the CSS style sheet. Now if you go to the style sheet, you can see the page content ID selector added, and it's also added to the selector menu. So then we can add some properties. There's no properties assigned to the selector yet, so we're going to go to the properties menu and add our custom properties. Select the width and select pixels, and then we're going to type in a width here of 950, and then go down to the margins. Make sure it's not locked, the chain is broken, so we can add different increments to our margins. So for the top and bottom, we're going to select 0. And even though it may read 0 here on the menu, you still have to type it in or it won't show up in the code. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 0. And then for the right and left margins, I'm going to type in auto. And you can see the code here added on the style sheet code view. Now go back to the page content ID selector and select the border property. Select the top border option, and we're going to define the top, the width border using pixels, and set it at 8 pixels. Then select the style as a solid line, and then we're going to add a color. So click on the color swatch, and we're going to type in a code here. So type in the number from the textbook and hit return, and then we get that dark brown color. And we can see the code view in the CSS style sheet. So now we've added the color for the border. And then we're going to go ahead and create some more selectors using the CSS Designer panel. So go back to your source code for the design.html page, and we're going to add a selector. So add, and then type in the letter N, and then gives you some options. So go ahead and select the nav option, and if you hit return again, then you'll be able to assign some properties. We're going to add a pixel width of 200 to our nav, and add a 10 pixel padding on all sides. So I'm going to go ahead and click the chain and type in 10, and that will assign it to all 4 sides. We're going to add another custom selector. So we're going to use the ID tag and type in main copy with the hyphen, and then we're going to add some properties to this new selector. So when you're creating your own website, you can make up your names for your ID selector. Just make sure that you name it be descriptive so you know which element that ID selector goes to. So I'm still in the main copy ID selector, and now I'm going to use the properties and go up to my width and select or type in a width of 500. And then we're going to add a min height. And what the min height does is just adds a minimum height so that if there's no content inside this container or element, it won't disappear, but it's always going to have a minimum height of 200 pixels. For our right margin, I'm going to type in 50 pixels. And that's the margin space outside of the container. I'm going to create another selector and call it the sidebar, so the hashtag sidebar. And then use the same process that you did with the main copy and add some properties to it. So we're going to go to the width, add 350 pixel width, and then the minimum height again is going to be 200. So we haven't added these containers yet, but we're just creating the selector properties first before we actually create these container elements. So now if you look at the style sheet, you can see all the code added for the nav element and then for the main copy and sidebar selectors. Since you haven't done anything to the HTML page, you could just save the CSS style sheet by just going to File, Save. Now we're going to go back to the source code for the HTML page and go back to the Insert panel, and we're going to insert now our navigation. So if you click on navigation, drag it into your window and just place it right in the header where you see the blue box around the header element, and then release. And then now we can see the nav element is placed inside the header tags. So kind of like the last assignment you did with organizing the color page and the typography page, and your navigation and your block quote needed to be inside the header tags. So make sure that you include it inside your header tags here. Now we want to add a section using the section element here in the Insert panel. So select the section element and we're going to drag it into our document. And we don't want to drag it into any other element. So I'm just going to kind of select below my content area and release. And now you can see that the section tag has been added into the body tags, but it's not placed in the header or the footer. So we can use that element display where it shows the section tag, and we can add an ID selector. I can switch back to CSS Designer to see that. So if I click on the plus sign, type in that hashtag sign, and I'm going to select the main copy ID selector that we created and hit return. And now it adopts the properties that we've assigned in that ID selector. So if you look at the CSS style sheet, remember that main copy style has the width of 500 pixels, min height, and then the margin. And so then if I look at the source code, that main copy ID selector has been added to the section. Now we haven't used the DOM panel, and we can take a look at that now. So if you go to Window DOM, you can bring that up. And then I'm going to place it down at the bottom below my properties here. And I can take a look at the structure of my site page. So here's my head, my body. Then within the body I have the section tag that has the main copy ID selector. Then I've got the header also within the body tags. And then I've got a div, and then I have a footer, and those are all inside the body tags. If I click to expand the header, I can see the navigation element is placed inside the header tag. I want to select the section with the main copy ID, and I can drag that down onto the div element. So just select it and drag it down right over the div, and now you can see that section element is placed inside the div container. So this section is now nested inside this div container. If you click on the plus button to the left of that section, select Insert After, and we're going to select and insert another section. So type in section or SEC and then hit return to select section and then hit return again. And then we're going to assign a tag to this new section container. So this is another way of adding an element here. So we are just adding a section after the section that we use the insert panel to insert onto our page. Now for this section, double click to the right and then we can type in our hashtag sidebar and hit return twice to assign that sidebar ID selector to this new section. So now we have two sections. So if you look in your code, also you have the section with the main copy ID selector and then the section with the sidebar ID selector assigned to it. In your code view, you can select that placeholder text for the page content div. I want to select the div with the page content where it says content for new div tag goes here, and just delete that right in the code pane. So sometimes it's easier to see some of the text in the code view and you can delete or add text right in the code view if you need to. You can go ahead and save your file, and then we're going to go on and control some of these section containers by floating them. So right now you have them both automatically, these section containers are automatically aligned to the left inside your div, but we don't, rather than having them stacked, we want to move the sidebar over to the right. I'm going to switch to design view and then go to the CSS designer panel and select current, and that's going to show me what I currently have here on my page. I've got the main copy section and the sidebar section with the ID selectors assigned to them. I want to click on the edge of my nav container to select that element, and then I'm going to click on show set to look at the properties, and then scroll all the way down to add property, and I'm going to type in FLO to bring up the float property and then hit return. And I want to float my navigation to the right, and so you can see now it automatically is attached to the right side of the container. I'm going to do the same thing now for my section containers. So if I select my first section with the main copy ID selector, I'm going to float that to the left. Now I want to select the section with the sidebar ID, and I'm going to float that to the right. So now we've organized this a little bit more, where our nav is floating to the right, our section sidebar is floating to the right, and then our section main copy is floating to the left. And if you click on the style sheet, you can see that code has been added with the float property. Now we're ready, going back to the files panel, to add an image. So if I got my image folder here, I can expand that, and I have a PNG logo, and it's a PNG file because this logo is set to a transparent background, so that's the advantage of PNGs. And so I'm going to select the Getty logo, and I want to drag and drop it right into the header. And then I'm going to select the content for new header tag, placeholder text, and delete that. Now I'm going to go to my nav element and delete the placeholder text and type in some custom text. So these are going to be my navigation links. This is going to be my navigation menu. So I've got about page, traveling exhibits, and permanent exhibits. Go to CSS Designer and now switch back to all so I can access my sidebar. So I want to select the sidebar, and I want to uncheck show set and properties and select the background, and I can select a background image. So I'm going to click on my folder and go to my images folder and select this parchment.png, and now that image is placed inside the section. I also want to select under background repeat, I want to select no repeat, and then I can go to live view. So sometimes the design view is not an accurate preview of what the site's going to look like. So if I switch to live view, this is more accurate of what my site will look like on the browser, and I can see that the bottom of this parchment is cut off. So I want to fix that using the properties. So go back to the background under properties, and under background position, I want to choose center for the first option and then bottom for the next option. So that's going to center it from the bottom of the image. Now we're going to use the properties for the sidebar under layout and add some padding. So scroll down to the padding, and we're going to add 10 pixels to the top, and then to the right, left, and bottom we're going to add 30 pixels. So notice when we did that, the section container dropped down because when we added padding, it made the entire container larger. So now what we have to do is go back to the width, and we have to make the width smaller to fit into that space again. So since we added 30 pixels on each side, we want to subtract 60 pixels overall to the width. So I'm going to type in 290, and now it will fit at that space. So just keep in mind when you add to the margins or to the borders there, you may have to adjust your box size. Now let's go to the main copy ID selector, and we want to do some of the same things by adding properties to it. So we're going to select the background, and this time I'm going to select a background color rather than an image. And you can use your eyedropper and just pick up one of the colors here in that parchment, and it automatically selects that color. Hit return, and it will apply that color to the background. Now we want to define some properties for the body tag. I'm going to go to my source code, and in CSS Designer again, make sure all is selected. Make sure Museum Styles is selected, and then we're going to type in a body selector. So add a selector and just name it body, and then we're going to add some properties to the body. Go to the margin, and we want to select 0. So type in 0 pixels, and remember, don't add any spaces, and hit return, and that will automatically add 0 on all sides. So let's take a look at the style sheet, and if we look at the body tag, you can see that the margin, it has been set to 0 pixels. So make sure that, again, you do set it so that it shows up in the code. Now go to the padding and type in 0 padding on each side. And even though it already says 0, go ahead and type it in again. And you can see what happens in the code under the body tag. Now the padding, the 0 pixel is added to every side of the padding because we manually typed it in. So again, make sure even though it may read a default of 0, you have to actually type it in to set the code. We're still in the body tag, and now we're going to go to our background and add an image to the background. So go to your background image folder, and we're going to select this floor JPEG image and open that up, and now that fills the background. For the background size, we're going to select cover to cover the background, and then for the background attachment, if you scroll down, you'll see the background attachment is defaulted to set to scroll, which means it's going to scroll when you scroll over it. So we're going to actually change that to fixed so the background doesn't move around. The other elements will scroll on top of it or over it. Now go to text, and we're going to define some text options. Under font family, we're going to select the Gotham family, and what this is it's a font stack, so it'll go through and see what's available on the browser where the site is being viewed. If Gotham is not available, it will go to Helvetica New, then Helvetica, and so on, or just a sans serif font that's going to be the closest to the font that's selected. So just keep in mind that whatever you design your site with, that font may not be available on the browser that the user will be looking at your site on. So you just choose a font stack and it will try to choose one that is similar. So under font size, we're going to type in a pixel size of 14. And then for the font weight, we're going to select a number, 300. And then the line height, which is like the leading or the line spacing, we're going to type in an exact size of 22 pixels. And now you can see that the text in our navigation and also in our sections is adopting this text styles for the body. So everything within the body tags is going to adopt that text style and the properties that we've assigned to the body tag. If you're not in live view, you can go ahead and switch to live view and take a look at what the site looks like. And I can go back to split view, and that completes stage 1.